On the morning of December 26, 2004, most people near the Indian Ocean were doing ordinary things. Families were on holiday, children were playing on beaches, fishermen were preparing boats. Entire towns were moving through what felt like a normal day. No one heard a warning, no voice from the sky, no sirens, no sign that the ground beneath the ocean had already shifted. No moment where the waves stopped and reconsidered. Far below the surface, an earthquake had torn through the Earth's crust. One of the most powerful ever recorded. The ocean didn't react immediately. It pulled back quietly, almost gently, exposing seabeds people had never seen before. Some walked closer out of curiosity. Minutes later, the water returned, not as waves, as walls. Entire coastlines were erased in seconds. Homes collapsed like paper. Cars became debris. People were carried inland, smashed against buildings, trees, anything in the way. More than 230,000 people died across 14 countries. Children, parents, tourists, locals, believers of every religion, non-believers too. The ocean didn't discriminate. It erased coastlines. It crushed villages. It turned buildings into debris and people into statistics in seconds. More than 230,000 lives ended that morning, not because of hatred, not because of malice, not because of war, because the earth moved. And in the days that followed, a question surfaced everywhere, not shouted, not argued, but whispered in grief. Where was God? If there is a God, why wasn't this stopped? This question doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from expectation. Because belief in God, at its core, is a promise. A promise that the world is not entirely random, that someone is watching, that someone cares, that someone can intervene when things go too far. The tsunami didn't just break buildings, it broke that expectation. This wasn't a crime that could be blamed on human free will. No one chose this. No one decided it. The tectonic plates didn't rebel. The ocean didn't sin. It followed physics, which means the usual explanations don't apply. Free will doesn't move fault lines. Moral failure doesn't generate seismic energy. Prayer doesn't change pressure in the Earth's crust. So, belief has to stretch, and stretching belief comes at a cost. One explanation says God does not interfere with natural laws. But this quietly changes the meaning of God. A God who never interferes is indistinguishable from a God who isn't there. A God who watches oceans rise without stopping them is not a protector. He's a witness. Another explanation says suffering has a purpose, that it teaches humanity something, that it humbles us, that it brings people closer together. But when you slow down and really sit with that idea, it starts to feel wrong. What lesson required children to drown? What growth demanded entire families be erased in seconds? What moral improvement justifies 250,000 deaths? When suffering reaches that scale, explanations collapse under their own weight. Another answer says God didn't cause the tsunami, He merely allowed it. But when power exists, allowing and causing blur into each other. If you can stop something catastrophic and choose not to, the difference between action and inaction becomes irrelevant. Power creates responsibility. And deep down, most people know this. They just suspend that instinct when belief asks them to. Others say God acted through human compassion, through aid workers, rescue teams, donations, rebuilding efforts. And that's true. But notice what that means. God didn't stop the wave. God didn't still the ocean. God didn't prevent the rupture. Humans did the saving. Humans pulled survivors from rubble. Humans treated the wounded. Humans built warning systems afterward, which raises an uncomfortable thought. If God's response only comes after catastrophe, and only through us, then the responsibility was always ours. The tsunami revealed something belief tries not to look at directly, that when things go wrong, the universe does not respond. People do, and this realization is deeply unsettling because it removes the safety net. Belief often functions as insurance, not against death, but against meaninglessness. It tells us suffering is supervised, that it fits into a plan, that it will be redeemed later. The tsunami offered no such reassurance. It looked random, it felt random, and it happened without explanation, which forces belief into a corner. If God exists and is all-powerful, the tsunami was preventable. If God exists and is all-loving, the tsunami is morally indefensible. If God exists but cannot intervene, then God is not what people are told He is. And if God does not exist, the tsunami makes tragic sense. None of these options are comforting. That's why belief resists them. Instead, it retreats into mystery. We can't understand God's ways. His plans are beyond us. This will make sense in eternity. But mystery is not an explanation. It's a pause button placed over moral discomfort. And when suffering is placed inside mystery, questioning it starts to feel wrong. Anger becomes rebellion. Grief becomes doubt. Honesty becomes a lack of faith. This is one of the quiet costs of belief that few people talk about. It doesn't just explain suffering. It manages people's reactions to it. It teaches restraint where protest might be natural. It encourages acceptance where resistance might be necessary. And in doing so, it risks turning suffering into something people endure instead of something they prevent. The tsunami did not wait for belief. It did not spare the faithful. It did not target the wicked. It did not reward prayer. It struck indiscriminately. And that indiscrimination matters. Because moral systems assume intention, they assume purpose. Randomness destroys that assumption. Randomness is the enemy of the idea that the world is guided by care. And once you notice randomness, it's hard to unsee it. Disasters follow fault lines, not moral lines. Disease follows biology, not belief. Accidents follow probability, not prayer. The universe does not appear to be correcting itself. It unfolds. And this is where many people reach a moment they never expected. Not anger at God, but disappointment. Disappointment that the world doesn't behave the way it was promised to. Disappointment that suffering doesn't pause for holiness. Disappointment that belief feels quieter when reality is loud. This disappointment doesn't always lead to atheism. Sometimes it leads to something more subtle, a quieter belief, a less confident one that doesn't expect protection anymore. People still believe, but they stop expecting. And that shift matters, because expectation is what makes belief powerful. Expectation is what gives prayer urgency. Expectation is what makes trust meaningful. When expectation fades, belief becomes maintenance. Something you preserve for comfort, not because it matches reality. The tsunami forced humanity to confront a hard truth, that if protection exists, it is inconsistent. That if oversight exists, it is silent. That if care exists, it does not intervene reliably. And that means something important. It means the stories we tell about God are not neutral. They shape how we respond to catastrophe. If suffering is part of a plan, prevention feels less urgent. If disaster is meaningful, intervention feels secondary. If pain is purposeful, endurance becomes a virtue. But the tsunami was not a message. It did not teach humanity anything we couldn't have learned without mass death. What humanity learned afterward did not come from God. It came from observation, from science, from preparedness, from early warning systems, from infrastructure, from admitting that the planet does not care, so we must. This doesn't make the world colder. It makes it more honest. Because honesty removes false comfort, but it also removes false excuses. If no one is managing the earth, then waiting is dangerous. If no one is stopping waves, then preparation matters. If no one is guaranteeing safety, then responsibility is real. And that is the moment belief stops being abstract. Because belief that cannot stop catastrophe must not be allowed to excuse it. Belief that explains suffering but delays prevention is not harmless. Belief that comforts people while leaving them vulnerable is incomplete. The tsunami did not need a reason. It needed prevention. It needed warning systems decades earlier. It needed infrastructure. It needed action. And that action came only after belief failed to protect. This is why the question isn't simply, why did God allow this? The deeper question is, what does belief cost us when it replaces action? Because if God could not stop the tsunami, or did not, then the responsibility for preventing the next one is unmistakably human. And that responsibility is uncomfortable. It removes the illusion that someone else is in charge. It forces us to admit that safety is not guaranteed, that justice is not automatic, that compassion does not descend from the sky. It must be built. It must be organized. It must be chosen. The tsunami didn't end belief overnight, but it cracked something important. It showed a world behaving exactly as it would if no one were supervising it. And once you see that, the question becomes unavoidable. If suffering is not guided, if disasters are not stopped, if protection is not promised, what does belief actually do? Does it help us face reality, or does it help us tolerate it? And that question doesn't demand an answer immediately. It lingers, because the next time the earth moves, the ocean rises, or a catastrophe unfolds, the same silence will follow. No explanation, no intervention, only aftermath. And once again, humans will be the ones who respond, the ones who rebuild, the ones who learn, the ones who try to prevent it from happening again. Not because the universe told them to, but because suffering demands action, not meaning. That doesn't prove God doesn't exist, but it does prove something else. That if a God exists, the world does not behave like one that is being protected. And if no God exists, the world makes tragic sense. Either way, waiting is not an option. The ocean will rise again somewhere. The plates will move again. The question is not what God will do next time. The question is what we will. Because if God could not stop the tsunami, or did not, then the task of protection falls where it always has, into human hands. And what we choose to do with that responsibility matters far more than what we believe about why the ocean rose. If this made you uncomfortable, stay with that feeling. These questions aren't meant to give easy answers. They're meant to stop us from accepting explanations that no longer fit reality. If you want more videos that examine belief honestly, without insults, without sermons, and without protecting ideas from scrutiny, subscribe. And if this video resonated with something you've felt but never said out loud, leave a comment, not to argue, just to acknowledge it. Belief under review. No sacred ideas, no systems beyond scrutiny.